Good morning and welcome to Thursday of Cows Week. So we've got this high in the southwest that's creeping in, and that's giving us our kind of general weather that we're experiencing. So as we can see, it's away from all of the fronts. We had a reasonably large transition last night while everybody was in Shepherds. So that meant that the air mass got a lot colder, and you'll see that in a second. So depending on where you are, you get a reasonably different story. So I'm just going to go into that now. So looking here, we've got a kind of building steady breeze. So kind of from 8 o'clock from 9 o'clock, it's kind of stabilized all the way to like 4 o'clock. And what we're looking at here is a gentle right shift on it in the central Solent and the Hillhead Plateau. And that's going to be what we do the majority of our sailing in, with a reasonable confidence, reasonable model convergence. We have a ridge coming through later tonight, which is basically two air masses meeting and kind of coalescing, and we kind of see that boundary. So what's going to happen is we're going to get the wind dropping a little bit and then rebuilding as this line comes through, and that will likely start to have an effect from kind of 4 o'clock onwards, depending on kind of the progress of that ridge, but also just kind of the general kind of strength of all of the drivers. So we see that in Central Solent kind of starting to creep in probably just after 3, and you can see the breeze dropping and then it drops quite significantly for rebuilding at 6, and that's obviously very pronounced, big wind shift. But the kind of northwesterly is reasonably stable. So we're going to look at Western Solent, and we can see very similar picture, apart from the drop or that big step change is an hour earlier. So again, we need to be quite mindful of that. Looking at the Eastern Solent, we have a slightly lower period in the kind of afternoon, a little bit lighter generally, but I mean, we're still looking at kind of 9 knots. That shutdown is going to be later. We can see that we're only really starting to see that influence from kind of 3 o'clock. Whereas in Central Solent, we were seeing it a little bit earlier. So generally, a little bit more wind in the morning and a little bit less in the afternoon. And then we see the shutdown coming a little bit later before that rebuild comes from the other direction. And I think there's a lot of value in that. So with this, we're going to get some low cloud in the morning, which is very patchy, pretty insignificant really. But those gusts are quite low, and they have got quite a bit of energy in them. They will be quite gusty in comparison to most normal clouds, which is kind of what we've been seeing for a while. These will start to thin out, and then we will get a really good line of cumulus clouds as the ridge kind of starts to move across. I just called it a trough there, which is not. So ignore that. Again, we're going to have wind shadows, so this time on the northern shore, and then we'll get that really nice convergence through Calshot. So parts of Hillhead may be slightly windier depending on where you are, and we can definitely use that to our advantage. Other scenarios, so as that ridge hits, if we look at this, we see that a slight drop in the wind speed beforehand, that could potentially be an hour earlier and a little bit steeper, and we just need to be very mindful of that because it will fall off a bit of a cliff. If that's the case, I don't feel like this one's quite as aggressive as they can be in terms of kind of wind speed and direction. So that feels reasonably safe, but it's always an option, so we need to be kind of mindful of that. And then looking forward, we've got kind of like a really light northwesterly tomorrow with a kind of southwesterly, and it's quite cold in comparison, so it doesn't feel overly like a thermal enhancement. But at the same time, there's quite a distinct kind of shift and build there. So that's definitely worth investigating for tomorrow. Yeah, thank you very much, and I will see you later.